Next up, coming to us from as a doctoral student at Duquesne University, speaking on Warhol's Wake, the difference between a small big life and a big small life, Tiffany Gilliam.
Guys, isn't this the most terrifying thing to bring for like a 15-minute? We're going to start on page 1 and go. Just kidding. I'm not going to do that. You guys aren't my friends yet, but you will be because I'm not doing that to you. Okay, what I am going to read is a little quote from a guy named Marshall McLuhan. My stuff is going to be about artists and how artists deal with everything that has been previously discussed that is happening to us in our current context. But McLuhan said a really long time ago that we live now in a new kind of world, but very few people dare to look at the present or to pay attention, I like to infer. I don't think it comes easy to people in any period, and I've never heard of anybody except artists who can do it. The artist does it because he's prepared to use his senses as scientific instruments instead of just using them as picked-up devices for his own satisfaction and scrolling. He's engaged in a critique of satisfaction. He's willing to put aside or reject all satisfaction in order to discover and probe. So please, although you don't know what I'm about to talk about, keep that in mind, like the role of artists, the intention of artists, and how that has changed. So, a while ago, I was at a gallery in Fort Worth, Texas. I'm from Texas. And they had a bunch of stuff, and it was a big modern art museum, and the details are in my thesis, but less than half of the space that they owned and were using was used for art. It was like, oh, a gift shop and, this and that and a little bar. But in the space where there was art, there was a bunch of Andy Warhol lithographs and stuff. And I have not forgotten and will never forget when I saw these two young girls, no offense to young girls, they do run the world. I am one of them. They came up to one of the Warhol lithographs and I wish I had my phone. But they looked at each other and their eyes were so wide and they were like, oh, these would make great backgrounds. And they took pictures and they went like this. And stood in front of the art with their cameras with the art behind them for their selfies. And that was like the thrust of my thesis. Like, what has happened? There was zero contemplation. There was zero approach. And it made me think, like, was this low-key what Andy Warhol was thinking or wanted or would have loved? So I went and did a study of 5 different artists, starting for 100 years between like the 1870s-ish to the 1970s-ish. And Andy is at the end. And since this is a 15-minute conversation and the medium's a message and it dictates how I say this, I'm just going to give you bullet points of all of their experiences and then their paying attention, their perception. They're not just like zombie participating. Like they kind of set themselves apart from what was going on around them and had responses to those events. So it starts with Robert Henry. This guy was born on Ohio farmland. His dad actually got in a cattle dispute and murdered somebody over that. So that means they had to change their identity as a family. He goes with his mom to Paris, and through that new experience that's like very similar to Ohio, but not at all similar to Ohio, he got into the readings of like Whitman and all these very perceptive sort of poets. And then he took that experience back and went to New York and he started an Ashcan school. And his mantra was art for life's sake, which is not art for scrolling's sake or art for like how we like now. Not that at all. It's like art for the whole experience of life's sake. And it's right down the road, I think. Last time I was here last summer, we were walking by and it was like, there's plaques everywhere here. It's like, oh, this is where Robert Henry taught for hundreds of years. And I was like, they get me. These are my people. And now I'm back. So that's the first guy. So he was just a guy on Ohio farmland, and his outpouring was an entire school that still exists today. It's like a generational impact. The next guy is Wyndham Lewis. He was born around the same time, but he was born on a yacht off the coast of Nova Scotia or something like that. His dad was in the war and just told him the most terrible, horrific bedtime stories that gave him a very palpable understanding of death and war and very ugly things. And then he went and saw it for himself in World War II. He always had this like mysterious rebel sort of persona based on his experiences. And then when he got back to school after the war, it was compelling to him because he had German classmates that wouldn't say the names that they had because they were scared, because they were German. And I see this like low-key in Hispanic culture or some other culture that's not American, and you have this beautiful name from your heritage, but you like call yourself Cindy or like Sarah or something like way easier for white people to be able to say back to you. So that's just like you're like judging yourself down for the society around you. So with all that experience and all that war and all that retelling, he created an entire new style of art that still exists. It's like Cubism and Futurism and that sort of thing, but it's not. It's Vorticism, and it was about like the angularness of the world that he lived in, or the machine-like thing, even like with war tools, like guns and stuff like that, industrialism, machinism. He made a brand new style of art through his individual perception and experience. The third guy is Edward Hopper, and I know you guys have all seen his paintings because they're super famous, but he was born a little bit later in New York too, but in industrial New York, and he saw the rural, like born in rural New York, saw the transition from rural to industrial in his life and how it affected his life. But then the technology, before it was the internet, it was mail. He got a mailed ad to come to some school in New York, and it was Robert Henry's art school. So he went there, he got influenced by Henry and all those poets and all that perceptive approach to things. And he makes these beautiful paintings of lonely people in man-made environments and like industrial surroundings. So you like have everything around you, but you're still isolated. His most famous one is called Nighthawks, and it permeates our current culture all the time. Like The Simpsons did a thing about it. So he's in there, he's in our world. So then the last guy before Warhol is Marcel Duchamp, which is like kind of easy to come to conclusions about him, but he is from a French family of artistic tradition. So they're like, we are French, this is art, and this is what we do. And he was like, maybe, I don't know about that. And he kind of questioned it, and he wanted to do different things. So he fled to the US during World War II because of the chaos. He just questioned his fine art norms and the expectations set to him by his family. And then guess who he met? Henry at the school. So he was influenced with that same perceptive behavior. And the outcome, his global outcome, is he made ready-made works. And you've all seen the urinal that he titled The Fountain that is in a gallery. So that's not like changing what art is. It's just starting the conversation. Like, is this scholarly tradition? Like, what is art? So that's how he changed the game globally with his individual perspective and offering. So lastly, I'm going to say the theme again, your individual consciousness and awareness brings about a universal conscious understanding. Like you can see an Edward Hopper painting of a lonely person in a bar and you understand that even though your experience is so different. So Warhol, I'm going to do the same thing, experience and outpouring. He was born in Pittsburgh, which is why I'm going to college now, with my ruffles and feathers. But he was born from Slovakian immigrants. And his mom was like a low-key kind of artist, even though in the end she signed all her work, Andy Warhol's mom. Did you guys know that? It's so ridiculous. And so he was like, grew up, he was babied his entire life because he was like meek and a little bit sick, and he always escaped. They were like, oh, Andy, go watch all the TV you want. Oh, Andy, go read all the magazines you want. And he was so consumed with this brand new, really shiny, popular culture. And then he went to New York to do some like ads in New York, and that was the beginning of his art thing. But then when he climbed the social New York City ladder, he was like, oh, I can actually make art. So it wasn't until after his social success that he started doing art and like the printmaking and stuff and doing all the factory and stuff like that. He had to establish his social success. So I think if we can see those other artists, how they had these kind of small lives that were very serious, very relevant, a lot of stuff going on, and they had this huge, like, global effect of change and of contemplation. What happened with Andy was pop art, obviously, I'm not an idiot, but he processed the outer environment and he brought it into the dialogue of art, which seems like a discussion in the Duchamp kind of way, but it wasn't, because he merged the environment with the flawed pretense of being anti-environmental. And I would just say that I don't think Andy Warhol was anti-environmental, because if the art and the artists themselves become the environment that they're trying to portray for the sake of paying attention, it stops being anti-environmental. So with his factories and the movies and celebrities, like, it continues to permeate today. There's this line is so blurry. I don't even think it's a line. I think it's like there's a giant lack of clarity. So this brings it full circle, like coming back to the art in the beginning and the girls taking the picture. Like, that's the permeation of culture. That's an environmental perspective, interpreting what it is they're looking at and kind of having their way with it in their environment. So that's where I'm at about that. But so the bad news is, to add the whole tech thing to it, which everyone else has done a great job talking about, electronic environments currently merge individuals with the environments. So we're external brain all the time, and we know it. There's like a very non-separation between the phone you're holding and what you think about, and ooh, I should post this, and ooh, who needs to read this, and where can I put it so people can read it? Like, it's all tethered together. So this perceptual awareness and this like anti-environmental stance is increasingly difficult to do. But there's good news, because I'm not a negative person. The good news is that escape is completely optional, and to just run away and to be obsessed with celebrity and to like space out is completely optional, but so is being perceptive. Every single human has the opportunity to perceive their experience, like, full stop. And you don't get an easy out because you're like, well, I'm not an artist. Like, it doesn't matter. You're all humans. Don't use that excuse. You have the option to perceive what's going on around you and everything in your entire life that has happened to no one else but you, and respond in a way that can have like a universal effect. So there's a universal power to individual experience, and this tool of perception is a response to this, to this weird thing is what would that look like for you guys? What would you create? What would you do with your perception? Who would you be? Like, that's a really, really fun thing to think about. And then for the last thing, I brought art last time, but I will just say, this woman, I was at my job and my boss came in and said, hey, my wife had a family member that just decided to watercolor some Halloween cards, which is not a thing. One, it's not regular to send Halloween cards like Christmas cards, but he had a whole pile and he was like, you guys take them. So I'm going to use her as a cop-out, because here, the lighting is so wonderful here, but I have a stack of them. But I was so encouraged because this was her perceiving, it was her decision to do like paint watercolors when she doesn't do that, instead of scrolling or reposting. She did like this kind of mood on the left and this kind of mood on the right. I love that kind of flex. I love when you give your brain the space to be a brain and come to decisions accordingly. And people are doing that less and less and less. Oh, look, there's a spider web here, but not there. Like, this is an activity, and I think it's brain work, and I think it's very, very helpful, and I think she'll probably live longer, pending health circumstances, than she would if she didn't do stuff like this, crossword puzzles and all that. So it's not just for artists to pay attention to what's going on, it's for everyone, because whatever everyone offers after thinking about that is so unique and has so much power. We just don't know it. That's all.